So thank you, everyone, for waking up early and coming to the Friday 8:30 a.m. lecture on the virtual reality. Sorry, I lost my voice somehow overnight. I did not go to the party, so it is not because of the Rams party, I promise. But my name is Thomas Yang. I'm one of the assistant program directors for Emergency Medicine Residency, and I'm also a simulation person for the Department of EM at the Medical College of Wisconsin. This is Dr. Wilbanks. He's our director for the student advisement, and he was also the M3 clerkship director. And this is Dr. Samuel Corbo. He's also my counterpart in residency, assistant program director, and a co-M4 clerkship director. So they're from the UME side, I'm from the GME side, but we're going to talk about virtual reality, talking nuts and bolts of the VR curriculum. So from somebody who does simulation, I mean, Dr. Baccio is here, who also does simulation here. Thanks for coming. That there's some pros and cons of simulation, right? It is versatile. It can, it gives you tactile feedback, so from procedural training. It is also very easy to replicate the cases, and you can use in any kind of simulation lab you want to. However, as we know that these simulation labs are also expensive, as a simulation center director, it costs multi-million dollars just to maintain the simulation mannequins, and this is besides the HR portion. Just the software, hardware costs multi-million dollars, but it's also stationary. Like it's very hard to move a mannequin from point A to point B. You can use test trainers, but it's very hard. So we're gonna talk about some of the other modalities of simulation, such as the virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality. And Dr. Wilbanks and Dr. Corbo will be able to talk about what we did with the virtual reality. So in virtual reality simulation, what's been used right now in medical education is actually being taught for preventative medicine or giving breaking bad news, giving like feedback, teaching empathy in medical education. And what virtual reality means is that pretty much you're in a virtual environment. So I'm going to give you two more terms, and it can be really, really confusing. You're like, well, this could be VR, this could be AR, this could be MR, but you just have to keep it simple. Virtual reality means using virtual platform. So virtual platform meaning virtual environment, not the real environment. What mixed reality is, that what that means is that you're using a virtual platform and also a real platform. So what that means is that you can use the haptic feedback that virtual reality, such as Oculus or any kind of other devices can provide you, but you can use on the real environment as well. So currently in medical education, what's being taught is a lot of neurosurgery or surgery simulation has been using in mixed reality thus far. Then comes the AR. I know there's a lot of R's in here, but augmented reality is, about a few years ago, I think general population found out about augmented reality through this, picture on the right, Pokemon. Yeah, you go to the street, remember, like you find a Pokemon, you try to catch them in the real street. So that's one example of augmented reality. But in medical education, what's been used in augmented reality is actually like anatomy. So in undergraduate medical education, they've been using such as a Google Glass, so what you would wear, and then there would be a 3D object that pops up, and you can rotate the object that is in front of you in the real environment, and you can study the nitty, the small, even detailed anatomy portion of, let's say, a heart or a liver or of a body using those using the augmented reality glasses. So this is pretty much the general diagram of what that means. So the XR, which I didn't talk about, it encompasses all three, but the VR, MR, and augmented reality is on different spectrums and all things. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Wilbanks and Dr. Corbo, because what we did is a little bit different, because the virtual reality, what we did is not just teaching empathy, but also teaching some resuscitation cases for procedures and all.
Great. So our institution received a grant in order to acquire virtual reality equipment and then use it in education. So what does that actually look like? Most people are familiar with virtual reality, at least knowing what the headset looks like. It's a big funny thing you stick on your head. It sticks out in front of your eyes. They weigh about a pound to a pound and a half. They can be pretty heavy, but generally they're very comfortable. They're meant to be worn. You can wear them for hours on end as long as your eyes don't get tired or you get motion sick, but they're highly customizable in terms of fitting to the shape of the user's head, and it can adjust. You can adjust the eyesight based off of your glasses prescription, contacts prescription. Some of them are more friendly to wear glasses on, and then you can also adjust like the distance between the lenses. So you really want a highly customizable, well-fit headset, because otherwise even the smallest distortion in what you're seeing visually could cause a lot of motion sickness and make the user uncomfortable. So this is the image that gets projected to either eye from the virtual reality system. There's a lot of aberration because as it goes through the lenses, it'll correct for that. So the lenses that are actually used are what's called a Fresnel lens. These lenses were originally invented in the 1800s to put in lighthouses. Basically, they can take a wide arc of light and project it into a beam, which is great for keeping ships off the coastline, but it's also great for taking a small picture being projected by the headset and then making it look like the user has a very wide field of view. So this is what our headset looks like, kind of viewed from an angle, and you can see all the ridges in that special lens, which also helps with having lenses designed like this. Also helps with the overall weight. You can have a much smaller, much more sleek lens that's able to do more than a larger lens would be doing with a lot more weight. Every VR headset's going to have some kind of handset, and while they can vary from model to model, in general, the inputs are pretty standard. So there's a thumbstick, which is similar to any modern gaming console if anybody is familiar with video games. There's a couple of input buttons. Ours are labeled A and B. There's a grip button for my middle finger, and then trigger finger as well for the index. And you can interact with the virtual space using a variety of these inputs, and I'll show you what that looks like later. Now, you're wearing this headset, again, fully virtual, 100% environment, so you're not seeing the room around you. This would be a great place to do virtual reality because I can take 20 steps before I run into a chair. If you're at home or in a classroom or there's a few more obstacles, then you really want to make sure the user stays safe. So while the headsets are projecting images to your eyes, most of them also have cameras affixed to the outside that can project the environment that you're in so that you can use your controllers, and when you start to use the equipment in a new space, you can interact and set a boundary that the headsets are keeping track of in the background, and when you approach that, you're going to see, it's going to give you feedback saying you're about to leave your safe space. There's a lot of different varieties of equipment. In general, there are a couple of things to balance, right? You can have a very portable system, you can have a very cheap system, or you can have a very powerful system. And it's hard to get all three of those in perfect harmony. In general, for something where you want high performance, something where you have a lot of learners in the same space, you're going to require a lot of processing power. And so that's going to require not necessarily your all-in-one headset that just works right out of the box. You're going to want something that's connected to a high-end gaming PC, something with high horsepower under the hood. And probably has some neon lights for decoration because it's meant to be bought by people playing, I don't know, what do the kids play? Fortnite? Or something? Yeah, I don't know. But generally the more money you spend, the higher the resolution your images are, the less lag there's going to be, and everything's going to look a lot smoother. So this is what our setup looks like. We have an Alienware PC. It's very heavy, but very powerful. Our headset are two controllers, and then those are the cords that connect the headset to the laptop. So it's one of those things where you do get kind of used to having the cords behind you, but if you're not careful, you can wrap yourself up and potentially pull your laptop off. I'm not saying that happened once, but I am saying that the laptop wasn't harmed, and I was much more careful the next time. These are a couple of examples. Most people, I think, are familiar with the fact that Facebook, now Meta, bought Oculus, and you guys heard about the Oculus Quest, now the Meta Quest. It's an all-in-one. It costs $350. It's not really meant for. It's meant for personal gaming use. The one down below, the HP, that's the version that we have. It's $550 and then requires the use of a PC that it's tethered to. And then the one in the top right is well over $1,000. It's an HTC Vive, but you get a pretty premium experience. Let's see. So we bought 5 headsets, 5 Alienware brand gaming PCs, which are really sleek to look at. But overall, this is a very expensive undertaking, and we spent about $20,000 just on equipment alone. Now, we're also working with a company called Acadicus in order to create virtual content. But in our space, in the emergency medicine space, there wasn't really a lot of content that we could have available to us and then use. So we had to create a case. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Corbo about what that process was like.
And to Dr. Wilbanks' point too, technology it's very submersive, and you really feel like you're in that space. He didn't harm a laptop. I harmed a lamp in my living room when my wife and I were just toying with technology to try to learn what it was like and to get a feel for it. So I'm going to talk about what it went through for us creating a case. And so Dr. Wilbanks mentioned the group we were working with, and essentially. How this all came about was the medical school got a grant to explore this technology through Acadicus. They reached out to us in emergency medicine to create the case, and so they brought the hardware and a checkbook for us to sort of toy with and create kind of what we wanted to see what was possible. So we were debating what we wanted to do for a case, and so we knew we wanted to do someone who was a sick patient, right? Like, we're not going to do a cellulitis case with this really cool technology. We really wanted to stretch it. We want something that was someone who could maybe crash or be more dynamic, maybe would involve procedures, really kind of stretch the technology. So something like neck fash would be, or maybe we could have it creeping up and blistering in front of us, which would be really difficult to create outside of that space. And so we wanted to definitely do, a sicker patient. 2, we wanted something, like I said, that was more difficult that we couldn't already do well in the sim lab. So like I said, if we can control everything down to what the wallpaper looks like, why not, really kind of push the technology, see what we can do with it. That is maybe different than what we were already doing. And so we wanted to maybe do something that would be more challenging. And so we thought of things like, a stroke patient, for example. Like, it's kind of challenging to not be obvious with more subtle stroke signs even with a really well-trained SP. And so we wanted to really see where we could push this and what we could kind of toss in. Like, could we have like a pallor slider so someone's getting, bleeding out, getting more and more pale as they're in front of the learner, and see if they pick up on those more subtle cues. Like I said, we wanted something that was dynamic. We want to stress our learners. We wanted to make it fun. And even when we thought about how we want to present this to maybe like a whole class of residents, we would maybe, instead of having them run a case in the sim lab in front of the entire class, we'd have our learners out in the sim area walking through a case while the rest of the program is watching them essentially on TV go through the virtual world and perform these cases. And so we wanted something that would be that would be challenging, would give the learners different tasks to complete and really stretch them too. And then some procedures and tasks potentially. And again, just to sort of see what we could do with technology and what was useful and what was not. And so we landed with cirrhotic GI bleed, and we'll talk about why. So some of this, I personally love teaching about GI bleed, and so that's maybe the reason I really wanted to push for it. But for one, we could scale to learner levels. Dr. Yang mentioned I am an M4 clerks director as well as an APD. I teach all levels. This is going to be really scalable. So I could do someone who has, maybe a little bit of instability or, maybe a little sick and teach my M4s about GI bleed. I can then ramp it up and have just like my Mount Vesuvius, hematemesis case with our near graduate 3s. And so it did seem like something we could scale, so we create one case to be useful for a lot of many different levels of learner. 2, we could use point of care ultrasound, see what that showed us. If this patient has ascites, that might change how we manage them. If they, have a collapsing IVC, that might tell us something about their volume status and might change, what our learners are doing. 3, potentially could do something with airway. This is a tough airway to simulate. I ultimately don't think that this is the best, that VR is maybe the best use for at least airway teaching as it stands. But I thought, okay, these GI bleed cases are pretty labor intensive to create. So maybe we could find something to have them at least walk through, a challenging hematemesis airway. And then this is where, one thing I thought would be really unique. It's not the sexiest of procedures, but technically balloon tamponad's a halo procedure. Not many people have done balloon tamponade in the ED, or not doing it very often. It's not much different than an oropharyngeal tube, but at the same time, like, there's some steps you have to walk through. It's at usually being performed in a high stakes environment, and those walking through the steps is probably the most challenging part of placing that. And so we thought there'd be some potential using that. So what are the challenges we face? It is expensive. So Dr. Wilbanks mentioned there's about a $20,000 buy-in by the institution just for the hardware alone, and then creating the case itself costs money. So it's expensive. Two, it costs a lot of money. And so it is expensive. Our case, actually, at least through the grant that paid for it, but a catechist charged, it was like roughly $10,000 to put together this case when it was all said and done. And I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but $3 signs, it costs a lot of money. And so it costs, at least utilizing the grant money, but it was $10,000 by the case. That was at an 80% discount to let them use that case to put it in the library for future learners. And so it is at this time, and I think this will change, but it is pretty cost intensive. And so part of the reason why everything that you put into the case costs money, and it's scaled based on the complexity. And so, but things like having pulse ox, having an IV, having a blood pressure cuff, to really make it realistic, that all adds up. But like things, we thought, okay, we could make them more jaundiced. We could have a pail in the slider. That's more complex, and that to the point where it became essentially too expensive for us to utilize. The balloon tamponade, which I talked about earlier, which is one of the reasons I thought this would be a good case, was so expensive it was probably not even feasible to do, and so it was tossed from our case. So not even possible. We took out things like labels for octreotide, protonics, and a toggle. And so it does, everything adds up to really kind of get everything you want out of it. Two, it takes a lot of time. We spent about 6 months after we learned to use technology just meeting with the group to get an initial case going, make some revisions until we had our final product. And then I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but it's expensive. And then last but not least, the group we worked with was great. They were, they really were good at communicating with us, but there's a lot of disconnect between what we know would be effective for our learners and what they what they were really excited about, what they thought that we could use. And so 2 examples of that. For one, like, they're really excited about airway. You just don't get the tactile feedback you would. And so we knew that airway, like intubating, would not be probably of value for our case. The other, another example, they when they were showing us off the first time, they were really, really excited. We were looking in horror. They were showing us how we could do suture repair on a patient with an abdominal wound in our department. So the patient's laying there, abdominal wound, and they were basically like having us walk through the steps. And we did to work with them, but like just stapling up an abdominal wound on a patient who, we're probably like stapling through fascia, through bowel, who knows. But they're a technology company. They don't quite get what maybe what we really need in terms of truly delivering teaching points for our learners. So at that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Wilbanks, who's going to show our case.
Yeah, so it became pretty clear that doing anything procedurally was going to be very difficult to replicate in a manner that was going to be helpful for learners. So ultimately, what we did work with a catechist, and they actually gave us even more of a discount. The overall buy-in from our medical school was about $5,000, because like some of the things that we were suggesting to change to our patient model, they wanted to incorporate as they were making their general model more complex. So, and I'll show you like what our scenario actually looks like. Let's see. So this is a live feed of myself in the virtual reality environment. I have 2 hands. I am teleporting around the room using the thumbstick. Basically, if you've got an emergency department room that's 30 feet by however much, you can't really walk in most spaces like you would in real life. So you teleport around the room using the inputs from your controller. So this is me coming to the side of the patient's bed. And yeah. I try to be like really, really still with my head and slow with my movements. But apologies to anyone who gets motion sick. It's a lot more comfortable when you're actually in the environment. But that's our sim person. Here I am using the inputs from the from the hand controllers to manipulate a piece of equipment. This is a pulse oximeter, so I can pass it from hand to hand and then apply it to the patient's finger. That menu off to the side is a way that I can change the patient's positioning in bed in real time if I want the patient sitting up or down, or if I want the bed up or bed down, basically mimicking what you might do in a real emergency department. This is the simulation manager. So in a situation where we have learners in the environment, but one person is facilitating and they are changing the vital signs, this is the input that only I see, that the learners don't see, that allow me to manipulate vital signs, increase or decrease the heart rate, SpO2, and then change like what gets put up on the vital sign monitor there. So right now I don't have any of the waveforms up, but I'm about to go in and change that so those can so that those can come up. And it can also be set towards, as soon as you put the SpO2, put their pulse ox on or put their blood pressure cuff on, it'll automatically display, or I can just have it display without requiring that equipment. So much like you would do in your control room in a high fidelity sim situation. Here I have a stethoscope that I'm placing on the various sockets over this patient's chest. The sound quality is pretty high fidelity, so I can place it over his chest and listen to heartbeat, breath sounds, and then through the simulation manager menu that I previously showed, and I'll show you on the next slide, you can give them a murmur, you can give them crackles, you can give them wheezes, you can have breath sounds absent. You can really change a lot of the things about this patient. So kind of what started as a GI bleed case ended up growing into something that could be customizable for a variety of clinical scenarios. So here I am manipulating the patient's breath sounds. So all of those yellow dots correspond to a socket on the patient's back that I can change what is being listened to. It's hard to see the resolution blown up like this, but on the left side, all of those breath sounds are normal, and then I'm changing them to coarse crackles in the basis, and then to fine crackles, as if a patient were in congestive heart failure. There's a lot of variety that you can that we can manipulate our mannequin with, including lower extremity edema. And a lot of this was iterated by a catechist software company as how they wanted their technology to grow, and was not. When we first started talking to them 2 years ago, this was nowhere near what they were able to do. But then I think they got a lot of ideas just working with us and then helping us with our case. So we can really take and we do have a jaundice slider now that they were able to add. We can do jaundice and pallor, but I don't have a picture of that, unfortunately. One thing that was helpful from a procedural standpoint that we wanted to do that Dr. Corbo had mentioned is the use of ultrasound. So what we have is you can grab our ultrasound probe and then socket it to this patient's left lower quadrant, and then we were able to put real video of a real ultrasound into the case that would pop up on the ultrasound machine. So. And we could do this for a variety of things if we wanted to have it be a positive fast, have it be we could do lung X-ray, really any ultrasound, and I think that's one of the values of going forward from a procedural standpoint. One thing that would be helpful, but we had initially tried to create something where we can do a paracentesis, but the mechanics involved of manipulating syringes with those awkward controllers, it just doesn't really correlate one-to-one. So we kind of abandoned the thought of doing significant procedures on this gentleman. Dr. Corbo mentioned it takes a lot of time to do all this, and we had initially hoped that by the time this talk came around, we had a robust run-through with our virtual reality curriculum. that has not been the case, but we have had a lot of learners like go through and look at our SIMMan just in terms of, are you able to comfortably move around the environment? Is this exciting for you? Do you think that there's benefit? And like they really enjoyed it. So I had 5 medical students last week just interact with our SIMMan for about an hour and we played around with it, and no one got significantly motion sick. They all really loved it, and they really liked the fact that we could manipulate him to show various pathology like asthma with significant wheezing and diminished breath sounds, or congestive heart failure. And they felt that the quality of the breath sounds and heart sounds, for instance, were a lot higher, was a lot better than what you'd have on a SIM mannequin. That can sometimes be difficult to hear or differentiate between various sounds. So that was a nice benefit. And then a lot of our learners had already like used VR previously. Like I had never used VR when we started playing around with this technology. Motion sensitivity for some faculty, I would say. None of our students seem to be bothered by it. But I think the biggest thing is that this is all in its nascent stages, and just by working with this company, we were able to see what how their capabilities grew over the course of a year. But I'm sure 2 years from now it's going to be significantly different. But once the content's created, then it's going to be easier to utilize, but the hard part is actually creating it. And so we went through a lot of growing pains and frustrations to actually put something together that overall only like kind of worked, but shows a lot of hope and has certain possibilities for the future. But maybe less so from a strictly procedural standpoint, which is probably best left to high-fidelity simulation, task trainers, et cetera. So that part was still pretty clunky. Overall, we think that there's a lot of potential here, but it's probably, at least in our experience, isn't extremely ready for being a robust part of our simulation curriculum. But we're happy to follow it along the way. And eventually, as the technology continues to grow, the fidelity is going to get higher, the cost is going to go down, there's going to be fewer barriers to entry, and we just need more content out there, which is on its way, I guess. Let's see. Well, we'll take any questions if you guys have. Oh, never mind. I think we're done.